In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost.
It is the midnight hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. And this is episode 2 of our season 3. Tonight we're going to look at the Avon Bridge, or as well known as Crybaby Bridge, and also some other Indiana haunted bridges. You know, the funny thing about bridges are they've been for years a part of our folklore. Tonight with us we have Jennifer Verne, research manager and podcast producer.
Good evening.
And Heather Lawson, case manager and podcast director.
Hello.
So tonight we're going to delve into bridges and haunted bridges. They've existed in every state, every country. And we're going to do a little deep dive there. So let's start out with the history of the Avon Bridge.
So, before we get into the main topic, Chief, let's look at some legends around other bridges.
Okay.
Much like Lady in White or Resurrection Mary.
Yes.
You know, those famous folk legends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Crybaby bridges are very popular legends. And no matter where you are, you can likely find a haunted bridge near where you live. Usually, but not always, they have elaborate rituals in order to see or hear the ghost. You need to go at night. You need to stop just before the bridge, turn off your lights, blink 3 times, turn around, tap your head, jump on one foot, you know.
Do the hokey pokey.
Says,
right? Exactly. Or slowly drive across the bridge so that the passenger can jump in your back seat, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So not only do we have the Avon Bridge that we're going to delve into in a little bit, but Indiana has quite a few others. So I'm just going to go through 4 or 5 here real quick. There's the Dead Man's Bridge in Advance, Indiana, off of Highway 74. The body of a vagrant or a criminal, some stories say was dismembered, was never identified, and this person is said to haunt the bridge down there at Advance. Dutchman Bridge, south of Terre Haute. Legend states that this bridge is called Dutchman's Bridge because a Dutch family traveling through during the covered wagon migration, right?
Yes.
Stopped overnight under the bridge where, of course, the woman delivered her baby who died. It's also said that in the 1930s there was a KKK lynching there.
Oh.
And both of these events have been credited with spirits that haunt that bridge. The Azalea Bridge in Columbus, Indiana on US 31 South. This is a story from the turn of the century, the 1900s, the 20th century. A young unmarried woman got pregnant and was shunned from her community. She was living in abandoned shacks, barns, whatever she could find for shelter, scavenging and stealing for food when and where she could for her and her baby. They claimed that living this way made her go insane, and in this state she wrapped her child in a white blanket and dropped the bundle over the Azalea Bridge into the raging spring waters of Sand Creek. Later, a farmer found the remains of the child, supposedly, hopefully burying the child, right?
Sure.
That's not mentioned in the legend. But
And actually, I've driven over this bridge and never knew it was even haunted.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, over the next few years...
You do now.
Yeah.
We do now. Over the next few years, this young woman continued to live as a hermit in the woods. Went crazy, ranting and moaning, wandering the creek bed and the bridge. She could be seen sitting at the edge of the creek, staring into the water, until one day she was found sitting still, dead, on the banks of Sand Creek. It is reported that if you look over the bridge, you may just see a white blanket in the water and hear a baby crying. If you stay long enough, you will hear the mother's answering calls. Now let's move to Dublin, Indiana, US 40. This is Cry Woman Bridge. Now this one's interesting because I actually went on Google Earth to try to find where this bridge is. And, well, we'll get
Is
there.
this the one that's on private property is no longer used?
Bingo.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, on Heacock Road was a bridge known as Cry Woman Bridge. Heacock, by Google Earth, looks like it's a short, twisty shortcut going between one point and another.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you look at Google Earth, it's like you got a 90-degree angle between these two country roads.
Yes.
And Heacock goes like a little snake right on like an angle corner intersect.
Okay.
So it cuts through rather than go down and up the roads. And there's a little tiny creek that runs through it.
Okay.
Now, on Google Earth, you can see that that's a private drive now that stops right where the creek bed is. Okay. But it's not that far to jump to the other roads. So I'm not sure why this road was there or what. But
well, it may have been back before they put any of the state roads in.
That could have very been easily. Yeah.
Access road.
Mm-hmm. So, by the way, based on what it looks like today, it is a person's private drive.
Yeah.
Do not go trespassing down this to find the creek bed. Okay, guys?
Yeah. Note to self, Spirit does not authorize or suggest that you should trespass or break any of the laws of the land.
Exactly. For looking only, not for urban investigating, right? Mm-hmm. So legend says the young mother was driving. She was new to the area, traveling with her baby. It was a rainy night and she lost control, going over the bridge and crashing. Searchers found the body of the woman, but could not find the body of the infant. Again, I have no idea when this would have taken place. There's no dating on this.
Probably ranks into folklore.
It does rank into folklore, but this would have had to have been before the 1980s because this story shows up in Ron Baker's Who's Your Folklore. Yeah,
okay.
And that was published in 1980, so this was definitely before that, which would make sense if they don't know who she is. Maybe she was new to the area. It would be hard to track down in the time before internet and things like that. The only thing they found of the infant was its blanket. Mm-hmm. Since the woman was not known to the area or claimed, she was buried in a pauper's grave with the blanket of her missing dead child tucked next to her in the coffin. Since then, she is seen roaming, calling for her child. Afterward, most of the area made sure not to linger at the bridge. But just before it was removed, a young couple wanted to go out and see what might happen. They claimed that not long after they got there, they saw the ghost. Well,
and the bridge has been removed since, right?
Yes, from what I could tell. Yeah. So maybe they didn't see her, but they heard her at any rate.
Sure.
Wailing and crying and calling for her baby. They did not stay to wait for a cry back.
I
don't know that I would have either.
Yeah. That's a little, well, you know, and there's no name attached to this woman, is there?
No.
Oh, so you can't trace a grave.
No, which is why the pauper's grave and all of that. Mm-hmm. But again, Lady in White and Resurrection Mary, popular folk legends, right? You're not always going to find truth in these, but they are local legends.
Well, that's it. I mean, one of the neat things about folklore and legends is it stays. Actually, they have more longevity in some cases than the truth. But I mean, they stay around. They become part of the customs and part of the legends that surround those towns that we live in. I mean,
right. And there's actually one bridge, and real quick before we get to the last one here, there's one bridge in North Carolina, and they called it Lydia's Bridge. And for years, it is a folk legend of a hitchhiking, the hitchhiking prom girl in her dress.
Lady in white. Yeah.
But it's also a bridge legend that she fell over the bridge and you can hear her crying and whatnot.
Sure.
Turns out, 2 paranormal researchers dug back into the archives and were actually able to track down an accident that happened at this bridge with a young lady. And I'm going to say her name wrong because I did not write this down on my notes, guys. Amelia or something like that, but her middle name was Letitia. I think her grandmother's nickname was Lydia. So that is where the name Lydia came. It's a real story. Somebody really did die there. She may actually still haunt that bridge.
Yes.
But that story transcended into a folk legend of Lydia's Bridge. So it's got the wrong legend stuck with it, but there's actually a poor woman who did pass away. An actual death. And they did find her in the records.
Wow.
So that's a cool story. Just if you guys want to look into it further, just Google North Carolina Bridge, Lydia's Bridge, and it'll come up. it'll come up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That may be something we'll have to look at in the future.
Yeah, we should.
Once we get done with the kind of the Hoosier run, we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, we should. It was really interesting how they found her and traced it all back.
Yeah.
So next we're going to go to Sullivan, Indiana. To the southeast is a place called Free Springs. Now, this is another one that I Googled.
I caved in Sullivan, so I'm thinking that sounds familiar.
Okay.
Back in my high school and early college days, I was a spelunker, and Sullivan had the Sullivan Cave, which was one of the legendary ones. It's on private property. Trapdoors down there, Salamander Cave, all those are down there.
Yeah. So I tried to Google this to find out where this bridge was. And the way the story described it, I could not find a road that travels across a railroad where the railroad travels alongside a stream.
Sure.
So the story is there is a railroad track going alongside a stream or a creek with a gravel road going over the both of them.
Okay.
Now I can find two roads, a road and a train track that go over a creek.
Yes.
And that is headed towards the rail yards. So it makes sense that it would be there.
Yes.
But I could not find a site that matched the exact story. So, we're looking at the Free Springs Bridge. Legend says that a headless body was found under the bridge. The body was never identified, and there are several origin stories. So one is a lantern man off of one of the many passing trains who had fallen off the caboose, breaking his neck in the fall. And if you go out to the bridge and park, you will see the light of his lantern bobbing down the tracks. The second story is that the body belonged to a tramp who was murdered, and his headless body was dumped under the bridge, where his spirit still wanders searching for his head.
Yes.
Still another story is that of a car accident, and a boy and his girlfriend were coming home from a date when the wreck at the bridge, the car caught fire and burned. The girl's body was found, but his body never was. Now they say you can hear him calling her name on the anniversary of the accident. So whatever the story may be, whether the claims are phantom voices, bobbing lights, or headless specters of the Free Springs Bridge,
Yes.
is a place for a spooky night out, if you can find a location.
Yeah, that's the catch.
You gotta find it first.
I gotta throw something out. There's a couple of things with Google Earth. Google Earth is one of the funniest research tools you'll ever deal with. And there's a group of guys on, they're on YouTube, and I don't remember what they are, but you can look them up, and they know when the Google car is coming through the photograph. So they intend every year, because Google comes through, they say on average every, I believe it's every 14 or 15 months. So they make arrangements to know when this Google car is passing. One time they had wrapped up a mannequin in black trash bags and tape, and it looked like they were digging a hole to bury it. They do all. One time they were caught mooning. They do this for Google Earth, and you can go to that location and see what their last photo was. And these guys are great. I've always enjoyed them, but that was one. The other thing was there's a place that everybody always used to when I was younger. Everybody talked about, if you were out in the middle of Pudunk this or Pudunk that. There's actually a Pudunk, Indiana. And there was a couple of guys back in the 90s or 2000s, early 2000s, that went to go find Pudunk, Indiana. And let me tell you what, it's like saying BF, Egypt. It's in the middle of nowhere. And one time, Pudunk actually existed, and it was a town. It had it actually had a post office and everything that's since been closed. But Pudunk has a bridge out there that you can't get to unless you go a little bit on private land. And supposedly that bridge, they had a carriage of 4 horses, which back in the day, if you had a wagon or a carriage and you had 2 horses on it, you were doing well to begin with. But if you had 4, you had money. That meant that carriage could move like a stagecoach could move real fast. And somehow or another, one of the horses tripped, and they end up dying on that bridge and killing the people in the carriage. But you can access it off of there, and this poor guy goes looking for it. And he finds a sign. He's in the middle, surrounded by like 4, everywhere you look. He's at a 4-way stop as cornfields. And there's this one side, it says, historic sign, says, "Welcome to Pudunk." I can think of several off-color jokes end up that way, where you're out in the middle of nowhere, and they got the best of you on this one, lad.
Right.
And so anyway, he goes off to look for this bridge, and he finds this hunting trailer. At least he thinks it's a camping trailer. It's a small trailer, maybe 20 foot long. and it's unlocked, and he doesn't go inside. But he says, I think it's a camping or trailer for when they're hunting. He said, but Jesus Christ, the whole area is creepier than hell. And he finally finds the bridge. But if you ever get a chance, look up Pudunk, Indiana.
Yeah.
It does exist. There is a Pudunk. I've never had the desire to go out there, but if you do, but they locate it by Google Earth.
Yeah.
And that's how they found the bridge.
Well, funny thing about Google Earth is you can Google famous places where weird things have happened just to see and get a perspective of that area. But I was listening to Astonishing Legends recently, and the Zygmunt Adamski incident over in the UK.
Yeah.
So that particular place where the officer supposedly encountered the UFO or UAP now.
Yeah.
That little section of road is mysteriously absent from the data.
Oh, yeah.
It's all blurred out. You cannot actually see that location. And that's interesting to me why certain places have been strategically
modified or blurred.
There's several places that are...
places.
A buddy of mine that he used to go ape shit because I would look up Area 51. It's blurred. They put you on a list when they do that. That same individual thought that the NSA was monitoring our computers. And I always told him, I said, they have better porn than we do. They are not monitoring our computers. I mean, we are not a threat in their mind whatsoever. But he would go ape every time we do this. But there's a lot of areas, in some areas, which you would never dream that are blurred. And you ask yourself, why? Because this is not a military base. Why is this little spot blurred? It's interesting.
It is interesting. It makes you think.
Now, if you look at Google comes back and explains this. They have an actual little blog, and I have read it. And it says that some of those areas were because the photography from their... They do this with 3 ways. They have aerial photography, satellite photography, and then mobile photography, which is done with a Google car. If you've never seen a Google car, it's the strangest thing in the world. A lot of people mistake them for anonymous vehicles that are driving on their own, and that's not the case. They're not an autonomous vehicle. They have boxes all over them. Those are all cameras that are taking pictures of all sides at once. And they put all those photos together, which make up Google Earth. And they say, well, there was a computer glitch. And every conspiracy theorist that wears a full hat with any dignity is saying, oh my God, it's the government.
That's right.
Yeah. Anybody can look at our government right now and say, yeah, that's probably not happening.
No.
Anyway,
and for somebody who can hit the delete button on accident, I can see how data can get deleted.
Yep. It happens.
I'm prone to that.
Oh, no.
It happens. So, just something to think about.
So, in 1908, the Friday Caller, a Plainfield newspaper, published a story on November 13th, 1908. And that story, in part, had this to say. 2 or 3 men have been killed in accidents at the Big Four Bridge over Big Creek, and now the bridge is alleged to be haunted. Reputable men say that sounds of a great weight falling into the water underneath is sometimes heard, but the water remains perfectly calm with no sign of having been disturbed. J.W. Bunk Atherton, one of our most well-known citizens, passed the bridge just after dark on election night, and he declares he saw some spirits hovering around the east end of the structure. And this, the Big Four Bridge, is the Avon Bridge.
Yeah. And honestly, I think you're the first person out of all the readings I've ever seen that ever connected anything on media that showed anybody died.
Oh.
Because there's a lot of legends to who all has died about the gentleman that fell in the concrete and the one that fell in the lake. But no one's ever found printed proof of that. It's always legend that's been passed down.
Yep.
So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, no, there's actually several workers that were actually killed. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, as on any construction site, especially in that day and age. I mean, just look how many people were killed during the Hoover Dam. Construction accidents happen. Construction accidents happen. So
and there was a lot of them on the dam. I was trying to remember.
Yeah,
but there's
27, I think.
Yeah, it was a major amount.
And the first death is connected to the last death.
They were father and son.
They were father and son, and weren't they killed? Wasn't the same date that they were killed?
I believe so.
I took the tour when I was in Vegas. I remember bringing that up.
Same month and date, just different years.
Yeah.
It's odd how those coincidences run. And we're not getting off into that because that goes into, Jonah's Code and everything else. And no, I don't want to get into that because that's a deep dive in a rabbit hole you never come out of. One of the things about, and you have the stories of the, are you aware of the stories of the guys that died there at Avon, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I think that, embellishment's one thing, but when I was growing up, the one we heard about, and I'm going to let you extrapolate on that, is the one about the gentleman where they supposedly had to cut his arms off.
Yes. So that is, I think, one of the more prominent ones.
Definitely more colorful.
Definitely more colorful because, yes, he did fall in. He was working a two-handed saw. And when he fell in, his saw and his arm were still sticking up out of the concrete. Mm-hmm. And they figured, well, we can't get him out because anybody who works in the, is from the Midwest knows about corn silos.
Oh,
and when
yeah.
you get sucked
Right
in,
down.
that sucking pressure.
Yeah. Collapses your entire body.
Yeah. You cannot pull, like quicksand, you cannot pull somebody from that kind of a situation easily. Mm-hmm. So they let him die and sink into the cement. But because his arm was sticking up out of the cement,
I got to do something with that.
they had to saw the dead arm off, right?
Yeah.
So there's other stories of this happening. So again, another folk legend, like Resurrection Mary. And in one that I read, the spectral hand could be seen on foggy nights, sticking up with the finger pointing.
Oh my God.
And if the finger pointed at you,
You're next.
that was an omen of imminent disaster. Yeah. Isn't that creepy?
Oh, yeah. Well, and
I'm not going.
every major construction, I don't care if you look up the Empire State Building, there are people that die during those constructions. If it's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's inevitable you're going to lose a life.
Yeah.
I know locally there's I believe it's a Hilton Garden down here in Indiana. It's on County Line Road off of 31 South. And there was a gentleman that died there probably about 10 years ago in the construction. And he was working beyond the point he should have been, and they came a very large thunderstorm that had a lot of rain and wind, and somehow or another he managed to fall out like the third-story window onto newly laid concrete or asphalted, drive, and ended up killing himself. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's anything, we've never heard of any haunted-related issues with that, but it sits right down there off County Line Road right before you hit Emerson. It's right there, as you come off the interstate.
Right.
And I think any big construction you run into that, but that's the one that got me. There, of course, there's 2 legends. Do you want to cover that?
No, you go ahead.
Okay,
Go
there's
for it.
2 legends with Avon Bridge. And, of course, when I was young, it was called Crybaby Bridge. When I was in high school, it was a necking spot. That's where we could wander off to. For me, I grew up on the east side, so it was a long way off. There was a lot closer necking sites that were less patrolled than that one. But everybody goes. It's like the House of Blue Lights. Maybe we'll talk about that later. And that everybody's got to go at least once. And to understand how this bridge is laid out, this bridge is laid out across a river, which is the
Big Creek.
And then on one side of it is the major road, and I think that's, what is that? That's it's not high school. It's do you remember?
US 36.
That's 36. I think it's US 36.
Yeah.
I think it's US 36, and then the other side
Don't ask
is
me.
in a park, and it's in the Avon Park, and it actually is a nice park. It's well kept. But anyway, when you went down there, you could climb up in these buttresses, and there's several arched ways in this. And I think altogether there's 14, I think, is what it is. I have to look at the number, look at the picture tape. I believe there's 14. Okay? And the main section of the bridge, now this bridge is ran by the Big Four Railroad. That's who owns the bridge, or did own it when it started out.
Yep.
And it was owned by a gentleman who lived here in Indiana that owned the Big Four Railroad, and that was put in that way. Now, at one time, this bridge was designed to hold 2 railroad tracks. There's only one that goes over it now, but for those that are trained enthusiasts for the state of Indiana, or more for Indianapolis, there's 2 large rail yards in existence here in Indianapolis. One is the Hawthorne Yard, which is located on the east side in Beech Grove, and the other is the Avon Yard, which is located in Avon.
Right.
And they used to have both Amtrak and CSX. Now, since then, Amtrak is the only one still on it. CSX is pulled out. I don't know where their maintenance yard is at, so that's not part of this broadcast. But I do know if you go to Beech Grove, you can drive by, you can see all the the Amex cars sitting out there, and they're working on them and restoring them. Okay, so anyway, at the time that this went on, when they were building it, of course, we have the legend of the gentleman who fell in.
Right. So it was single trussed first.
Yeah, it was single first.
And then in 1907 and 1908, it became double truss.
Yeah, double truss.
Yeah.
I knew there was some point because the bridge was always wide enough to support two, but as I understand it, now correct me if I'm wrong.
That I don't know. I don't know one
See,
way
I was
or the
always
other.
told it was wide enough to support two,
Yeah.
but they only had money to put one in.
Okay.
Because when they did this, the bridge was paid for by the railroad, by Big Four. But when they got ready to run it through, the additional track, they had to have funding from the city of Avon. Well, Avon wasn't that big back then. So they couldn't do that at the time. They only could put one in. Since then, they have two on there.
Yep.
Now, that's a big transit point because it comes out of the Avon yard. Now, I live over near the Hawthorne yard, so, I grew up near there, and all there was trains running all the time. I mean, we got to the point where they'd bang at night, and they'd fire off torpedoes and things, and we wouldn't pay attention to them.
We can still hear them.
We can still hear them where we're at now. Yeah, we can still hear the Hawthorne yards. And you just get to the point you kind of just blur that out.
Right.
It's something you get used
Right.
to. But the big one, of course, was the worker that fell in. And, of course, one, he just fell in all the way, one story. The other one was, the arm and saw was sticking out, and they had to cut him off and, and then patch it so he didn't show up anywhere. The problem is none of this exists in written print. Now, the one that Jennifer found is probably the only written print I've ever heard of. And Apostar has nothing on it. But that's the first time I've ever heard of any deaths being mentioned.
Yeah.
It stands to reason that they had some. Now, these buttresses are arched buttresses that are in between that support the bridge. This is not an uncommon design. You'll find this throughout the United States. What a lot of people don't know is that each one of these has an access point. In the middle of it, they have a door that goes to the next one. So you can get into the lowest one, say on the far right side, and go all the way to the far left side by just going over them. And then, of course, the passage gets smaller as the arch gets toward the center, and it gets longer and taller as it goes. Problem was, we had kids that were getting in there, and graffiti was the minor part of it. They used it as a minor hotel. They used it for drug use, everything else. So the city of Avon and the sheriff's department there went and blocked it off. And they put up great big metal, because used to there was a metal stairway that got you up to it, and you climbed on the first one, you go through all of them. They shut that down, and since then kids have found a way one way or another, through crick or crook to be able to get into them, and there's still plenty of graffiti. But you can actually walk through, and I believe on YouTube there's a WTRV WTT4 broadcast that shows one of the guys walking through all those. I've actually been through all those when I was a kid. It wasn't roped off then. And, you could go through them. There wasn't a whole lot of excitement about it. It was kind of it's like going caving. You have to, contort a little bit through the smaller areas and to get into the big areas.
Right.
But, it was still okay. The other legend has to deal with a young lady. And there's 4 different or 5 different variations, probably more than that.
As usual.
Yeah,
right?
as usual. That comes with any kind of bridge folklore. One is that goes back to the time that Indians were on the territory, and that this woman was crossing the bridge and a train was coming. She threw her baby, hoping the baby would live, and she died and the baby died. Well, first of all, the Indians weren't around when this bridge was built, so that one's probably a no-go. Another one is a lady again was coming across this bridge. Now, bear in mind, it wasn't until what date did you say they put the second track in that you found out?
1908.
Yeah, 1908. So prior to this, if they were crossing it, they had plenty of room on one side for the train. Train could cross and you could cross, wouldn't be a problem.
Right.
To this date, they have catwalks on both sides. You can walk down it.
Yeah, this is not like an old wooden trestle bridge like you see from the movie Stand By Me, where you have the overhanging planks where you have to plank it over one over the other.
This is a concrete structure.
Yeah.
It's very nice. So there's plenty of room. So it's probably unlikely this happened. But, they claim that a woman was crossing and that she had to jump with her baby, and the baby survived, but she didn't. But the baby cried, and no one found him, and it died of starvation. So there's variations all the way through. It's just like the white lady, gray lady. It's a typical folklore.
And then there's one of a young student, a boy, crossing in the middle of the night, and he hears the train coming. And he thinks, shoot, I need to get off the bridge. He thinks he's closer to the shoreline than he is, so he jumps off, then realizes that he's over the river and screams to his death.
The other thing is, this river is not this is not White River.
No.
This isn't 80 foot deep or 20 foot or 30 foot.
But if you fall and land on
it would be enough to do some damage, and you probably wouldn't survive it. But the river
But you're not
itself...
going to float away.
No, I mean, it's good fishing. There's people who fish the river. I've seen them do it, but it's probably, at most, on a good day, is 10 foot in the middle, if it's that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times it's more like 4 or 5 foot. So, I mean, you know, it's not a huge-ass river, but, I mean, still...
It's still a deadly fall.
Still a deadly fall, and you still can drown. You know, one thing the Navy drove into as our heads was you can drown in a teaspoon of water.
Right.
And so, you know, it is what it is. I mean, you can very easily drown in it. But the neat thing about this was it's kind of like the House of Blue Lights. It's one of these legendary kind of romantic folklore legends.
Yeah.
They go back, because when I was in school, everybody talked about Crybaby Bridge. You know, you can go out at night and hear the baby crying and the woman weeping, or you can hear the guy screaming who got caught in the concrete.
And this is so popular in Avon.
Oh, yes.
Much like Indianapolis with the Circle of Lights, this bridge is on their county seal,
That's
their city seal.
It is so prominent.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, when Avon was in its early development, this is all they had going for it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Avon, I hate to say that, and everybody's going, oh my God, he just insulted Avon. Yeah, no, but you know, back in the day, you know, it's like Cumberland. Okay, Cumberland, I'm going to insult it because I wouldn't live there. I mean, you know, it's gotten awful rough, but back in the day, in the 70s, Cumberland was a nice little town. Mm-hmm. But what it had going for it was Corky's Steakhouse and a few monumental locations. Other than that, it was just a place on the map.
Right.
You know, it was no different than going anywhere.
And now Avon is definitely more than a place on the map.
Oh, God, yes.
Oh,
I mean,
my goodness.
Yes, we passed through there on the way
But
to
after
Cover
this,
Bridge.
if we find a house there, they're going to say no.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. No,
they're going
They're going to nope, they're not allowed in.
Yeah.
We
There
heard
goes
what you said.
Wouldn't be the first time I've been asked to leave. I mean, you know, but anyway, yeah, it's so much more than what it was. You go out there now, and it looks like a very vibrant community.
It really is, yeah.
I seen something in the news the other day where they're expanding, so I mean, they've done a lot.
Right.
But back when this was there, this was a big thing. If you put a bridge in, it was, because newspapers had to look for things to cover. If you don't believe me, look up a 1800s newspaper, like you were talking about earlier with the Hanna house in episode 1.
And they were talking about people visiting.
Yeah, people visiting and parties. And, you know, because, hey, that was all they had to work with. They went with whatever they could find. Mm-hmm. So I remember seeing a picture of this bridge with 6 people on it at its building. And, you know, that was some of the founders and people. This was a big thing. I mean, you know, it'd draw the mayor and a crowd when this was put in. So, I mean, it's still part of our culture here in Indiana.
Right. But there is actually a DePaul University professor that wants to debunk the hauntings of the Avon Bridge.
Yeah, he's the one that did the study on the train sound, didn't it?
Yes. So
yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah, in his book, Artistry and Ingenuity in Artificial Stone, Indiana's Concrete Bridges. How a train passing overhead sends reverberations careening eerily through the structure's caverns. So the fact that they had those empty rooms probably added a lot to it, Truex said. And after a while, it just increased. So they think the reverberations are actually what you're hearing when you're hearing the shrieks and the cries. However, let's think about this a second. Concrete bridges are not the only bridges that are said to be haunted. Bridges all over are said to be haunted.
Yeah. Still
wooden bridges. Everything. So what is it about bridges and water that equates with spirits, like our Fisher's ghost?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we know water, flowing water, it can act as a recorder. It can record physical instance. We know
and
that.
It's also, running water is also supposed to be spiritually purer than standing water.
Yes.
Now this is way back, right?
You know that you can drink running water. Right. You just got to filter it. But if it's stagnant, you don't drink that because it's not safe.
So evil cannot cross purity, right?
Exactly.
The old superstitions, right? Yeah. So think about this. Bridges are an open liminal space. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're in the middle of something, floating over another flowing
almost
liminal
like a passage
space.
Or a portal.
It's like a suspension.
Yes.
It's like a suspension in dimensions.
Oh, yeah.
So where things can maybe get trapped.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It really does. You know, the funny thing, I think, I read the DePaul study on that, and, you know, a lot of things we're getting into nowadays, one of the big things is infrasound.
Yes.
And, you know, we don't have a mic yet to do that, but we're in the process of getting a mic and software to pick up. Infrasound affects an individual in a psychological base level, subliminal in the fact they can't hear it, but yet it can careen into other things and cause people to experience, much like high EMF. Anything from nausea to hearing odd sounds to being hallucinating. And if a bridge is built right, there's no reason that can't happen. We found that in Aztec and Inca culture, a lot of the structures were built so that at certain times of year, when the wind blew through them, it created a certain sound.
Yeah.
One that would invoke its followers. And I think that you're probably looking at the same thing here, truthfully. I mean, it could be, but it has a lot of interesting folklore. Now, we wanted to investigate this site, but they will run you off. You have to really go about getting permission from the county sheriff and from the State Department. The Public Works actually maintains the bridge.
Yeah, so once again, Spirit does not endorse any trespassing of any sort.
For any reason, or breaking any laws, and don't tell them that Chief said you can do that. Yeah, that's not how that works. And honestly, you can go up and get on the stairs, but if you're there very long, it won't be long. A patrol car will pull up, want to know what you're doing. When I was co-authoring a book about Shelby County, I'll never forget, we went out to Werewolf Bridge. I hadn't been out there 15 minutes, and a deputy sheriff, Shelby County Sheriff, pulled up, wanted to know what I was doing. And there's nothing better when you explain to any of your law enforcement that you're working with the parapsychology end of things. Yeah, your credibility goes down the shitter right there. Let me tell you what, one big flush. And the guy looked at me and goes, yeah. And in that very language. But he didn't bother me. He let me stay. Of course, I had already talked to Skip, the sheriff. He knew I was there, but it was always kind of funny how that worked. So anyway, long story short, Avon has a really wonderful background. It really does. I mean, it has a rich folklore heritage. Is it haunted? Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know we'll ever know, because I don't know we'll ever be able, even if we got permission to go in and do the actual investigation. You got all the cars.
Yeah, the acoustics in there.
Yeah, it would be a mess. Yeah. And the acoustics, which the DePaul University study says, hey, this could very well affect how things work. And I mean, so that could be an issue. You don't know. I mean, you really don't know how that would work out. So I don't know we'll ever know the answer, but it's one of the legendary folklores of Indiana, and it's one of the great things about the Hoosier State. I mean, you get to keep these and pass them on to your grandchildren. Scare the shit out of them. Yep. Anyway, but yeah, so certainly. Well, I think that's about all we have today on the Avon Bridge, or tonight. So with that, we are getting ready to move on, and I want to thank everybody for all their hard work. This episode was written by Andrew Brooks, our Chief of Staff, and Jennifer Verne, our podcast producer, and our research manager. And with that, we will now revert to the ghost story of the day.
Today's ghost story of the day is from Weird Indiana, your travel guide to Indiana's local legends and best kept secrets, by Mark Merriman, James Willis, and Troy Taylor. Tunnelton Tunnel. For railroad companies, tunnels mean obstacle, bypass, and time and money saved. But for others, tunnels mean adventure, mystery, and rites of passage. Such is the case in Tunnelton, the home of a nearby nearly 2,000-foot-long tunnel train that burrows directly through a hill 3 miles outside of town. Known as the Big Tunnel, Tunnelton's tube was first used in 1856. Curious spectators would flock for miles to watch trains emerge from the hill. At first, part of the curiosity was the various problems the tunnel experienced. Slow-moving trains meant passengers, often dressed in their finest Sunday whites, would emerge blackened, having been covered in soot and smoke. The vibrations from the trains themselves often led to huge hunks of rock falling from the hillside, much to the delight of onlookers. Eventually, the tunnel walls were lined with brick, and this problem stopped. Soon the novelty of the tunnel wore off, and its visitors were much less upright mentally. Local legend has long held that at least one murder victim's body was disposed of in the tunnel. Stories say that a man named Henry Dixon was murdered and placed in the darkest portion of the tunnel right on the tracks. When the next train came through, the engineer didn't see the corpse, never slowed down, and completely destroyed the body. Because of the lack of a corpse, local officials were never able to convict his murderer, even though the identity of the guilty party was well known in the area. These days, the tunnel is still in use, although far less frequently than it was in its glory days. It's mainly the stomping ground of fascinated teens who visit the place as a rite of passage. Graffiti covers the entrance and the walls, and litter is scattered about. Teens often test one legend of the tunnel. It's said that Henry Dixon's spirit still haunts the darkest part of the tunnel. A person who makes it all the way to this middle point of darkness will experience one of two things. Either Dixon will brush past and move on, or he will mistake the visitor for his killer. If the latter occurs, Dixon will chase the person all the way to the other side. If you do decide to visit the infamous Tunnelton Tunnel, be careful. Not only are there restless spirits to deal with, but the occasional train still rumbles through, making it very dangerous.